Bhante. I've been listening quite a lot of your CDs. And one of the CDs you mentioned about the Vipassana. And you mentioned that the true Buddha meditations is actually the 4 jhanas, which is one-pointedness. And Vipassana is contemplation. So in this case, when you mention 4 jhanas, you are mentioning that the true teaching of the Buddha of meditation is samatha? Or?
Yes. But actually you can say samatha vipassana because the samatha and vipassana are basically the 8th factor and the 7th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? The 8th factor is samadhi, right concentration, and that is defined as the 4 jhanas. Even in the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, this is described as the 4 jhanas. And samasati is vipassana, because basically vipassana is contemplation, and contemplation means contemplation of these 4 things. Now a lot of people translate sati as mindfulness. It is not exactly mindfulness because mindfulness, as people generally know, means general mindfulness, right? When you're walking, you know you're walking. When you are sweeping, you know you're sweeping, etc., right? That is general mindfulness. But that is not sati. There is another word for that general mindfulness, which is sampajanya. Sampajanya. So, in the suttas, the Buddha said, now when you practice the spiritual path, you have to practice 2 things. These 2 things are sati, sampajanya. Sati means being mindful of your bodily actions, through your body, your speech, and your mind. So when you're walking, you know you're walking. When you're eating, you know you're eating. When you're dressing, you know you're dressing, etc. That is the description of sampajanya in the suttas. And you notice when the Buddha talks about even this word, mindfulness, sampajanya, it is in relation to your body, to your bodily actions, It is not in relation like watching TV. It's not looking at a pretty girl. That is not sampajanya. In the suttas it says sampajanya means when you're walking, you know you're walking. When you're eating, all your bodily actions. Why? Because when we put our attention on our body, the mind does not stray. The mind does not stray. When you walk the spiritual path, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get liberation from samsara. A lot of people miss the point, What is samsara? Samsara is the flow of the asavas. And Arahant is called a kina sava, one who has destroyed the asavas. So this word asava is extremely important. Unfortunately, a lot of monks who teach meditation don't explain what is asava, because if you know the real meaning of asava, then you know a lot of monks are teaching the wrong meditation. Asavas means uncontrolled mental outflows. Literally, the word asava means outflows. Low in Chinese is low, right? Lao. Lao. So it is basically the flow of the mind. This flow of the mind is so strong, the tendency of the mind to flow is so strong that when you are not mindful, it flows. For example, if you're not doing anything, you start to daydream. Tak wang xiang, as the Chinese say. Daydreaming. And then the tendency is so strong that when you try to sleep at night, the moment you fall asleep, it flows again. Dreaming, yeah. So this flow is extremely dangerous. Why? Because this flow is basically the flow of the sixth consciousness. Okay? And the sixth consciousness is samsara. When the sixth consciousness flows, the world is created. The world is only in the sixth consciousness, nowhere else. That's why the Buddha said, samsara, the world is within this fathom-long body. The origin of the world is within this body. The ending of the world is within this body. The way to the ending of the world is within this body. So, when the seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, smell, taste, touch consciousness flows, the five consciousness flows, you create the outer world. And the mind creates the inner world. So as long as the sixth consciousness flows, you have the world, you have samsara. And nibbana is the ending of the sixth consciousness. When the sixth consciousness stops, that is nibbana. Okay? So, in the spiritual path, what you are trying to do is to stop the flow of this consciousness. Because when the consciousness flows, sometimes, usually you lose your mindfulness. So for example, an ordinary person may walking along the street, looking at the beautiful girl, looking at the beautiful sights, and the mind is at the same time flowing. So his mind is scattered, going out through the six senses. But whenever you are mindful of your body, you stop this flow, For example, if you are sitting in meditation, and when your mindfulness runs, you'll be thinking of your office, thinking of your friends or your family, your home. But the moment you remember you are sitting here, you stop that stray thoughts. Right? So that's why the Buddha said, mindfulness of the body is the way to the deathlessness. As long as you're mindful of the body, the mind does not stray out. That's why sampajanya is also not general mindfulness. It is general mindfulness related to the body. Okay? Sati is different. Sati comes from a root word that means to remember. Okay? So why is sati got to do with remembering? Because sati is to remember, to be mindful only of four things. The body, the feelings, the mind, and the Buddha's Dhamma. Only these four things, if you're mindful of these four things, you can attain liberation. If you're mindful of other things, it is not so helpful. Right? That is why sati is, actually in the sutta, sati is defined as a person who has sati remembers what is said and done a long time ago. That is the definition of sati in 9 suttas. 9 suttas confirm the same thing. That sati means the quality of being able to remember. Okay? So sati is to remember, to be mindful of these four things. That is the practice of sati. So the practice of vipassana is that, to be mindful of these four things. So if you are mindful of these four things, you don't have to sit to practice that. When you're walking also, you can be mindful of these four things. When you're sitting in a bus, sitting in a car, you can also contemplate these four things, right? So that is the practice of vipassana. But when you sit down and you close your eyes, you should practice samatha. Because you cannot walk around and practice samatha. And if you lie down and practice samatha, you fall asleep. Kun Sien. So, when we sit now, we should use the opportunity to practice samatha. In the Majjhima Nikaya, Venerable Ananda was asked, what type of meditation is praised by the Buddha? And he said, the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. Now when you attain the fourth jhana, it is said that you have perfected sati. In the definition of the fourth jhana, you have utter purity of sati in the fourth jhana. On the other hand, there are some vipassana monks, some famous vipassana monks who say, what's the use of jhana? When you are in jhana, you have no mindfulness. That is the opposite of what the Buddha says. The Buddha says, when you attain the fourth jhana, you have utter purity of sati. You can look into the suttas. That is exactly what the Buddha says. So what happens when you have utter purity of sati? When you have fourth jhana, you have so good a sati that you remember your past lives. That's why the Arahants, they can remember their past lives. Because they have perfected sati.
So, Bhante, when I hear about from the CD, you mentioned the jhana is actually, the four jhanas are basically one-pointedness. When you mention one-pointedness, are you referring to, I know it's samatha, but are you referring to the four contemplation, like the nama rupa, the feelings, and just how you mentioned that? Is that
no, the difference between the practice of samatha and vipassana is that when you practice samasati or vipassana, you can contemplate on any of the four objects of sati. You can change. You contemplate one and contemplate another. You can go from object to object. Okay? But when you practice samatha, you only concentrate on one. All the time one. And that is actually the practice of satipatthana. Satipatthana is different from sati. Practicing sati is practicing the seventh factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. When you practice satipatthana, it is the intense state of mindfulness. Because if you look into the Samyutta Nikaya, under the Satipatthana Samyutta, there is a sutta where the Buddha said that if a monk practices Satipatthana skillfully, he must end up with samadhi, one-pointedness of mind. He must end up. If he does not practice Satipatthana skillfully, he will not attain jhana, one-pointedness of mind. That's why there is also one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha talked about the charana, the practice of the holy path by a monk. Then the Buddha says the monk practices sati sampajanya, and then after that he practices this satipatthana, and then he attains the second jhana. So instead of the Buddha saying that he attains the first jhana, the Buddha saying has said that the first jhana is actually synonymous with satipatthana practice. So he bypassed the first jhana into second jhana after that. So, in the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta, I think 117, the Buddha said, now if you practice the Noble Eightfold Path, it must be in a systematic order. You cannot start with any factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. You must always start with the first factor, which is right view. If you have not attained right view, you have not entered on the Noble Eightfold Path. You must enter the Noble Eightfold Path only through right view. That's what the sutta says. Because after you attain right view, that right view will bring you to right speech, the right thoughts. And after right thoughts, you will get right speech. And then after that, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right recollection, and right concentration. Okay? This practice of the Noble Eightfold Path must always start with right view. And the attainment of right view, there is only two conditions to attain right view. This is stated in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think Sutta 43. One is the voice of another. Only the voice of another person teaching you the Dhamma can you attain right view. And the second condition is yoniso manasikara, thorough attention. We pay thorough attention when you are listening to the Dhamma, then you can understand and attain right view. So a lot of people, they come into meditation and sometimes the meditation teacher tells them, don't go and study the books. You just meditate. Unfortunately, if you just meditate, you're never going to get right view. And if you don't get right view, you're never going to become an Arya. Because in the suttas, all Aryans have right view. Without right view, you cannot be an Arya. Even if you have psychic power.
Bhante.
Sorry, just now let me finish. I was saying about Satipatthana. So in this Majjhima Nikaya 117, it says to attain the factors one by one. So after right effort, you practice right recollection, samasati. And after samasati, it must end up with samasamadhi. So how does samasati bring you to samasamadhi? The link is satipatthana. When you practice sati and you only concentrate on one object instead of many objects, for example your breath, all the time you're mindful of the breath, it must end up with samasamadhi. So satipatthana is the link between the 7th and the 8th factors. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, Bhante have been teaching a lot on the suttas, various sutta teaching and so on. And looking at the background of Bhante from the Mahayana before, and I think you also said before, there are so many more extra suttas as compared to the original Pali Canons. How are all these extra come about, and are they contradiction to the original doctrine of Pali Canon?
Yes. Okay. When we investigate the 5 Nikayas, we find that the first 4 Nikayas, the Digha Nikaya, Majjhima, Sangyutta and Anguttara Nikaya, they were closed, they were concluded at early stage, no more addition. But the last one, Khuddaka Nikaya, was different. Khuddaka Nikaya means the minor collection or small collection. And it is called small collection because it started with 1 or 2 suttas that did not fit into the other 4 Nikayas. Okay? So because it could not fit into the other 4 Nikayas, or it was discovered later, then they put it in the Khuddaka Nikaya. Okay? That's why it's called a minor collection. But over the 2,500 plus years, people have been adding suttas, not only suttas, other books into that Khuddaka Nikaya. And this is very evident in the year 1956 when the Burmese held their Sangha Council. When they held their Sangha Council, they added 3 more books into the Khuddaka Nikaya. And these 3 books, they know are not suttas. And everybody knows they are not suttas. And yet they added them into the Khuddaka Nikaya. Books like what? The Petako Padesa, Netipakarana, I think something like that. So, even they know it is not the words of the Buddha, that it is a later book, still they added in. From there you can see how the other books got added in. So when we investigate the books of the Khuddaka Nikaya, we find Sri Lanka, most of the Theravada countries, they say that Khuddaka Nikaya consists of 15 books, but the Burmese say it consists of 18 books. So when you investigate these books in the Khuddaka Nikaya, we find 6 that does not contradict the earlier 4 Nikayas. And what are these 6 books? They are the Dhammapada, the Udana, Itivuttaka, Sutta Nipata, Theragata, Therigata. These are the 6 books. So because they do not contradict the earlier 4 Nikayas, we can accept them to be the original words of the Buddha. But books like Charya-pitaka, Buddha Vangsa and all that contain a lot of airy-fairy stories about the Buddha that contradicts those that contradicts the earlier books we cannot accept. Things like paramis. A lot of things we have been taught and we believe them for so many years. And it's very difficult to dislodge them from our thinking. Things like paramis were never taught by the Buddha. Paramis were mainly these Mahayana teachings, because the Mahayanis, they find to attain Arahanthood so difficult. And they say better to become a Bodhisattva. And they talk about 6 paramis. And these 6 paramis, if you look into them, they are worldly qualities. Even their wisdom is worldly wisdom. Truthfulness and all this. And then those 6 qualities don't belong to the Noble Eightfold Path. So how can you get out of samsara that way? If you perfect your paramis, you probably end up as a universal monarch. You have such good blessings, you'll be the king of the whole world, but you're never an Arya. And then, these Mahayanis, Mahayana books started 500 years after the Buddha. And the Hinayana books also started around the same time. The Abhidhamma, the later books, like the other books, commentaries and all that. The Visuddhimagga was written 900 years after the Buddha's passing away. So, after a few more 100 years, the Mahayana and the Theravada, instead of fighting each other, they start to accept each other. Then the Mahayanis start to accept the Theravada books. Last time, for a few 100 years, they told their followers not to look at the Theravada books, because I was a bodhisattva before. You look at my head, got 9. So in the Mahayana bodhisattva precepts, there is a precept against looking at the Theravada, what they call Hinayana books. Not allowed to study the Hinayana books. So because of that, they threw away what they call Hinayana books for a few 100 years. Later, when they start to accept Theravada, they start looking for the Theravada books, and they already lost this. So they start to find Digha Nikaya from one sect, Majjhima Nikaya from another sect, and all this. So you find the Ahanjing, the Agama Sutras come from different schools, and they're not complete. They're only about half of what our original Theravada Suttas have. So in the same way, our Theravada start to accept Mahayana teachings. And then they see Mahayana has the Bodhisattva path. They also want to follow the Bodhisattva path. The Mahayana have 6 paramis, so the Gyasu, they have 10 paramis. So that's how. Rojak.
Last question, anybody?
Yeah, Reverend. What I've heard is that since the Buddha is not around, apparently you need a Buddha to confirm if one is an Arahant or not. I've read a book that says that if you practice jhana, you can attain Nirodha Samapatti and consciousness cease for the maximum of 7 days. In that respect, maybe it's not necessary for a Buddha to be present to confirm you are Arahant, because you are able to attain Nirodha Samapatti. And apparently such Arahants are able to dictate the time of departure from samsara. Is it true?
Yes. Pertaining Arahanthood, there are different ways of attaining Arahanthood. In fact, most of the people who become Arahants is not by attaining Nirodha Samapatti, because attainment of Nirodha Samapatti is an extremely high state. You have to go through the 4 Rupa Jhanas and the 4 Arupas, or the 4 Arupa Jhanas. Then only you can attain to that state. So most Arahants don't attain that. Most Arahants, they attain 4 jhanas, and then they listen to the Buddha's words and become enlightened. It is stated in one sutta that it is impossible to become an anagamin or an arahant without the attainment of the 4 jhanas. That is stated in the Majjhima Nikaya. The Buddha said totally impossible to become an arahant or an anagamin without the 4 jhanas. Because when a person attains the 4 jhanas, the hindrances are cut to such a low level that all the things become obvious to that person. Knowledge arises. Whenever he inclines his mind to know something, immediately he knows. The mind is so sharp. A lot of people, let me finish this one. So this, in the Vinaya books, it is stated that the first 1060 Arahants attain Arahanthood from listening to the Dhamma. Listening to the Dhamma is so important. This samatha is the foundation. When you practice samatha, it is said that when you attain the first jhana, the 5 hindrances are eliminated. A lot of people, they make the mistake of thinking that when either they don't accept that the 5 hindrances are eliminated permanently, or in other words, if people don't accept that the 5 hindrances are eliminated permanently, they think that only when you are in jhana, the hindrances are eliminated. When you are out of jhana, the hindrances come back. That is not true. In the suttas, the Buddha says that these 5 things, sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry and doubt, these 5 hindrances, they are called hindrances when they are strong. When they are strong and obsess the mind. When they obsess the mind, then you become blur. So, when a person attains the first jhana, the hindrances are cut down to a low level. It's not that they are eliminated entirely. they are said to be eliminated, meaning that they are cut to a low level so that they no more obsess the mind. If they don't obsess the mind, they are not a hindrance. It's just like when you're walking through lalang. If the lalang is 4 or 5 feet tall, that is a big hindrance to you. Right? It will cut you and all that, and you can't see and all that. But if it's cut down to 1 foot, is it a hindrance? It's not a hindrance. It is still there, but it's no more a hindrance. It's no more called a hindrance. Right? So you can take it, for example, like when a person attains the first jhana, the lalang is cut down to 1 foot. And then when a person attains the second jhana, it is cut down to maybe 9 inches or 8 inches. Okay? And then when a person attains the third jhana, it's cut down to 3 inches. But when it is cut down, when a person attains the fourth jhana, it is cut down to less than 1 centimeter. Then the person can see very clearly. No more a hindrance at all. That's why the psychic powers come. And when a person hears the Dhamma, having attained the fourth jhana, he hears the Dhamma, sometimes only one discourse by the Buddha, and he becomes enlightened. This was what happened with the 1,000 Jatilas, ascetics, matted hair ascetics, who lived by the banks of the river. And they were fire worshippers, and they practiced samatha meditation. And because they practiced samatha meditation, some of them, like the leader, had attained psychic power. And when they had attained psychic power, like the leader, he thought he was an Arahant. But he is not yet an Arahant. And so the Buddha, when he wants to teach, he will look for people with 4 jhanas. Either this lifetime or previous lifetime had attained 4 jhanas. So he went to these 1,000 Jatilas. And these people, because they have psychic power, they're very hard to teach, They have some ego, they think they have some attainment. So the Buddha had to stay with them for a few weeks and show psychic power. Show so much psychic power that they were fully convinced that the Buddha was a higher level than them. And then only the Buddha told the leader, Kassapa, you keep thinking you're an Arahant, but you are not an Arahant. It was like a slap in his face. Then he woke up. Then he considered actually his cultivation is less than the Buddha. Immediately he cut off his hair and begged to be a disciple of the Buddha. So when he did that, 999 of the others all also followed suit. So they all shaved off their head and became monks. Now after that, the Buddha taught them one sutta, the fire discourse, because they like to pray to fire. So the Buddha used the simile of the fire. When the Buddha talked about fire, they were all ears. Then just listening to one discourse, 1,000 of them became Arahants. There was another person by the name of Yasa. He was a layman with 4 wives, enjoying himself with sensual pleasures and all that. But the Buddha made him come out to the forest in the middle of the night, go to the forest where the Buddha was, made the gates open by themselves, went to where the Buddha was. There the Buddha taught him the 4 noble truths. Listening the first time, he became a stream enterer. The next morning, when the father came looking for him, the Buddha preached to both of them the same sutta. Hearing twice, Yasa became an Arahant. Even a layman also can become an Arahant, but he's a very exceptional layman. There are some, for example, there was one, he was also a rich layman, enjoying sensual pleasures and drinking liquor. He was half drunk. The Buddha walked past his house. When he saw the Buddha, something from the past stirred in his mind. He stared at the Buddha, and the memory came back. He sobered immediately, no more drunk. Then he went to bow to the Buddha and became a disciple. So the Buddha will purposely go to people who have jhana from their past life or this life. They listen to the Dhamma once, and immediately they become Arahant or Arya. So, listening to the Dhamma is the most important way of becoming an Arya or Arahant, the most common way. Nirodha Samapatti is very, very rare. Even among the Buddha's disciples, those with psychic power are not so many. Maybe 1/3 to a half with psychic power.
Bhante, I got a more worldly question, less scriptural. How can one be a political activist and be a good Buddhist? It's a practical question, And the other aspect of my question is...
Wait, one by one. You can, but you have to be very honest. It's just like being a businessman. Can you be a businessman and a good Buddhist? You have to be very honest with yourself, right? Certain things you can do, certain things you refuse to do. Okay? What's the second question? Last question, please.
Well, in a way, it is linked to the first question. I see, like in Buddhism, there is a solution for many problems we see today. Just take one example, like the environment. But I don't see any or much Buddhist leadership in the environmental issues. It's perplexing to me. I would have thought, most Buddhists most good Buddhists anyway, they have very small carbon footprint, and I don't know whether if you're getting involved in it, then you become attached, and therefore you're not a very good Buddhist, You know what I'm trying to allude to, that when you involve in change, you become very passionate, you become very attached, you have to agitate, you have to a certain degree, it's almost like a hate message against whatever is existing. So is that in line with Buddhist practices or not? Because, you say walk a straight and narrow path. I can understand that, but it's very difficult as a lay person, you get me? So my question is, where is the leadership from the Buddhists, on say issues like the environment, human rights? Are these too worldly to be concerned with, or we're more concerned with the scriptures? It's a question I struggle with in my head,
Okay.
Thank you.
Firstly, if a person like me decides to walk the spiritual path, it means we have made a commitment to let go of worldly things, okay, and to concentrate on the spiritual path. But there are some monks who are still concerned with the environment, like in Thailand. There are some monks who try to preserve the forest from being cut down. And I remember reading in the paper somewhere that there was one Thai monk, because of that he got murdered also. And the other consequence was like some of the foreign monks, they could not renew their visa because they were active trying to preserve the forest and all that. So there are some monks who do this also. But concerning lay people, most lay people are caught up with their families and earning a living, right? So most lay people have no time for this. And those who take the initiative, take the trouble to join Greenpeace and all these things, they have to sacrifice their time for their family, risk themselves, take a risk. They might get, fighting for human rights, might get murdered. So it's nothing to do with Buddhism. It's the same problem with Christians, with other religions. Whether you want to take up the issue or not, it's whether you have the time and the courage. Right? So nothing much to do with Buddhism. It's just a matter of your conscience. Okay? Okay.
Thank you very much for Bhante Dhammavuddho's very knowledgeable and very satisfying this Dhamma session. I believe everyone have enjoyed this session very well. Let's say sadhu 3 times to our Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.